And welcome back, everybody, to the Podcaster Nation. And I say welcome back because I know you were just listening to one of our other episodes and you came back for more because you just wanted more and more. And guess what? We have it for you. We have another guest, another awesome story. You guys are going to love this. Thank you very much, everyone. All of you podcasters who are getting on the show, all of you listeners who are commenting and sending me messages about how much you like this. I appreciate it. And you guys are the engine that keeps us going. This is the podcast that is about podcasters. It's for podcasters and it's done by podcasters. And our guests are podcasters. You guessed it. That's right. This is the place, our community, where we lift each other up. This is the place where the rising tide raises all ships. Folks, we have a great guest for you today. A very, I think, unique topic, only because I really haven't seen this much. But I am intrigued as all get out to have this conversation with this wonderful person. Please welcome to the podcast the host of the As I Live and Grieve podcast, Kathy Gleason. Kathy, how you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me, Rory. And I can't tell you how excited and how privileged I feel to be here.
Oh gosh, I mean that's a lot. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
I appreciate your time very, very much. So thank you
Mhm.
for being here today to tell your story. Now I've listened to only one of your podcasts. Full transparency, I wish I could have listened to more.
I know.
I have way too many interviews right now to listen to more than that. But
Mhm.
but the one I listened to, I learned a lot about what you were doing and why and everything else. But this is a podcast that you know the subject of it is grief. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw it to you.
Okay.
Tell us who you are. Tell us about the podcast and maybe how you got into doing this.
Oh, well, I kind of say I got into podcasting by divine intervention. Um, I had been working in hospice, actually, and had decided to retire. So I wanted to still volunteer, and they had me leading a bereavement group. In hospice, most people were there, they would lose their spouse or lose a parent. But it doesn't stop there. It goes on in what is called grief. And grief is most commonly thought of when you lose someone by death. But grief can even be as simple as getting a divorce, breaking up with a girlfriend, getting fired or terminated, laid off from your job. Anything you lose, you can have a reaction to, and that reaction is grief. So, at any rate, I was in hospice doing the bereavement group, and then, oh, we all know what happened. COVID hit.
Hmm.
So the bereavement group was halted.
Gotcha.
Then when the pandemic started to wane, the hospice home came back and said, Kathy, would you start up the bereavement group again? And I said, sadly, my answer is no, because I would spend an hour or more every week preparing for this group only to have one or two people show. And I know this whole issue of grief is a lot more prominent than that. Everybody grieves in one form or another, but nobody wants to talk about it, especially as it relates to death. And I used to literally find excuses to not talk to my mother when she wanted to tell me her preparations for her
Whoa.
funeral. I would, those rescue calls you have when you're dating? I would have somebody make a rescue call so I could say, "Oh, mom just got called into work. Sorry, I have to leave." Because I was just so uncomfortable talking about death. Well, hospice changed that. And we were all sitting around the table at the home, and I was trying to figure out what could I do instead of a bereavement group. Could I make it virtual? Would that attract more people? What could we do? And I don't know why, how it happened, but the word podcast floated into my mind. I opened my mouth, I verbalized podcast, and my daughter, Stephanie, my older daughter, my best friend, said, "Oh, great idea, Mom. Let's do it. I'll help you." And that's how I got into podcasting. Now, suffice it to say, at that time, I only knew the word podcast. I had never listened to one. I had no idea what was involved. But 6 weeks later, after Stephanie and I did our research, we launched As I Live and Grieve with 5 episodes to start.
Wow.
And that's how I got in podcasting. And that was a little over 4 years ago and over
Yeah,
200 episodes later. Yeah,
I was just going to say that. And you've been doing it ever since. I
been
mean,
doing it ever since.
4+ years and 200 episodes, and you come out weekly.
Yep.
I mean, that's awesome. Congratulations on that. Those are
Thank
big,
you.
big milestones in our
Thank you.
industry. They
Yeah.
really are. Put you in the
Yeah.
top couple of percent
Yeah.
just based on episodes, which is
Uh-huh.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, so okay, so it was your work through hospice that kind of got you,
Correct.
spreading the message and thinking about it. Now, when you first got into podcasting, was it what you hoped it was going to be? Because you kind of jumped in cold. So I'm curious, did you feel like, okay, this is it, and I feel like I'm getting my message out, or were you kind of like, I don't know if this is going to work, or
There were some issues as we got started, but part of our preparation, I wanted to make sure that the podcast was going to be sustainable. So I said to my daughter Stephanie, we need to sit down and make a list of, I want at least 52, one for every week of a year. I want at least 52 ideas or topics that we can talk about related to grief and or death. And if I can't come up with fifty questions I have, I'm not going to do it. Well, my list was 75 and hers was over 50. And I have to tell you, we've gone through those topics. That's what we started. Here's the question: who do we know? Let's find somebody that can talk to us about this. And that's how we started. I also had to start out with scripts. What was I going to ask my guests? But once I started, I guess I never looked back because I love people and I love to learn. So with each guest, I learned something. And with each guest, I myself healed because at that point, I had been about almost 3 years after losing my husband to brain cancer.
I'm
So
sorry.
I was grieving myself. And I had also had in my lifetime three other losses, both parents and an infant son. So I had four major losses, was grieving myself, but really never thought about it.
Got it.
And the podcast helped me heal.
And I've heard that a million times, and I feel the same way
Mhm.
that podcasts are like therapy for the
Yep.
podcaster.
Very cathartic. Yep.
Absolutely. Um, Now, I also remember from your episode, you're very clear that you're not like a therapist or licensed or anything.
Nope.
You're, and I think you said one of us.
We say we're not clinicians, therapists, anything like that. We are you.
Were you? Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I want the people to know that we're not selling a service. I'm not selling coaching lessons or grief sessions or workshops. I'm just offering this to them for information to make them feel less alone, maybe to pique their curiosity, maybe to make them investigate something that might help them. That's my reason.
So this is all from you sharing your personal experience then.
Yes, yes.
Awesome. Sometimes that's the
It's
best way.
it's based on that, right?
Okay. And now on your episodes, and you and I talked about this a little bit in our pre-interview, but I just want to like spell it out for everybody.
Mhm.
Do you have guests on every episode, or do you also do solo episodes?
There have only been, I think, two or three solo episodes.
Hmm.
One was the very first episode. Stephanie and I did it together, and it was kind of like Walk With Us, I think was the name of it. And we just wanted to let people know who we were. So we kind of gave our backstories, why we were doing this, and what we were hoping to accomplish. At one point, then, I needed to take a break of about a month. So I did a solo episode about why I needed a break and that I would be back and everything like that. It's just full transparency. And I think one other time, maybe around the holidays, I had something special I wanted to say. So I did a solo episode then. All of the others, we've had guests and sometimes repeat guests.
So, especially with this topic, how do you go about finding guests who,
Well,
I mean, have dealt with this? I mean, for instance, the episode I listened to, which I think is your most recent, I mean, this lady had lost her husband
mhm,
to, a type of brain cancer.
right.
How do you go about connecting with her and with everyone else for your show?
Well, when we started out the podcast again, we had a list of topics or questions.
Mhm.
And I'm a very avid reader. And I know that authors generally like to talk about their books. So we
Ah,
would take that topic, and then I would go to one of my best friends, Amazon, and I would browse that topic, grief, pure and simple. And I would get a list of recommended books on the topic of grief, and I would try to find someone who I felt kind of matched that topic or focus that I had. If it was losing a child, that's what I would look for, somebody who'd written a book about losing a child. And then I would send an email, invite them, and probably 9 times out of 10, that author would be very willing to be a guest on the podcast. That's
Wow.
how I started out. Now I'm kind of at the point where a lot of publicists and PR folks are reaching out to us, referring their clients, many of whom are authors.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got people referring to you now.
At this point, yes. And I'm so excited about that. I can't tell you how
Congratulations.
excited I am. Yeah.
That's so great. I mean,
Yeah.
that's awesome for you.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. In
mean,
fact, I
wow.
think this week alone I have, oh, I'm kind of building up a queue. So this week alone I have seven actual podcasts to record, and probably five of those have been recommended to me. I did not go looking for them.
Wow. All right. I love that. I mean, seriously,
Mhm.
congratulations. That's the one
Thank
thing
you.
I can tell you because I think
Thank
that's one
you.
of the things that everybody aspires to is to be wanted in this
Yeah.
world instead of
Yeah.
always be the one asking.
Right.
So now you said that that's how you started versus, this is how it is today.
Mhm.
About how long had you been doing it? Or, I mean, was it a number of episodes or an amount of time where that whole, platform started to shift?
I want to say it was probably a couple years it started to
Okay.
shift. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's not bad.
No,
No.
no, I didn't think. In fact, I was very surprised when the first one happened. I thought, "Oh, look, somebody found me!" I got so excited. Um, and and I'm never one too. This is this is to other podcasts. I don't focus on the statistics as much. I mean, of course, I do look at downloads, you
Right.
know, but I get more excited about the number of listeners in different countries.
Gotcha.
That has been my benchmark and my milestone. And I have watched our reach, if you will, grow from, 30 countries, something like that. And now we're over 100 countries around the world. Now, it doesn't mean that that listener tunes in every single episode, but
Sure.
it means they're, yeah. So now I have a general plea out there. If anyone knows anyone going to the North or South Poles, please tell them to get on Wi-Fi and download an episode of my podcast because I'm dying to have one of those polls on my list of countries.
That's great. I
Yeah.
I mean I know what you mean about the countries,
Uh-huh.
especially because it does really show your reach and how you're doing. But um, I mean, I didn't even know there were 100 countries.
I think there's like 150 something. So
Holy
that's the
cow.
goal. That's the goal.
That is absolutely magnificent.
Countries I've
Um,
never heard of, actually.
all right, now I wasn't going to go into this question quite so soon, but I
Sure.
think we're kind of going that direction.
Okay.
I always ask everybody about monetization. And
Okay.
as you're telling me these things, you're being referred. I mean, you've
Mhm.
got people calling you about the
Yep.
podcast. You're over 200 episodes, which means you're considered established by
Hmm.
the establishment. You're in the that top several percent or whatever it is, for
Hmm.
podcasts at that point. Um, you love what you're doing. You
Yep.
have guests every week.
Hmm.
You're consistent, and yet you have a very unique, to my ears anyway, view on monetizing your podcast. Would you like to
Yeah.
share that with everybody?
Well, for one thing, monetizing a podcast is like writing a novel. You're not going to get rich. You're really not, unless you spend an equal amount of money. And I didn't start this podcast to make money. I started it because I felt grief and death needed to be talked about. It needed to be made, it needed to be normalized so that you could have a conversation with someone without really feeling like you wanted to run away, like I used to. So I chose to not monetize my podcast. For one thing, there are very few sponsors I think that fit well with the topic of grief.
Hmm.
I certainly don't want a funeral home as a sponsor. That just kind of rubs me the wrong way
Okay.
because I want my podcast to be about people growing and kind of redefining themselves as they're grieving, not staying in that pit of despair, but kind of moving on. And even the name of the podcast, As I Live and Grieve, I expect to grieve for the rest of my life, but it's going to change. And my life is going to change, and kind of, I'm going to absorb that grief and go on living. I'm a different person than I was when I lost my husband, for example. So, monetizing my podcast was not something I wanted to do. I'm fortunate in that I can keep my budget pretty lean. I do most of the work by myself. I do have a virtual assistant that edits my podcast for a very reasonable fee. If anybody's interested, just, contact me. I'll give you his name. And my younger daughter, Kelly, also helps me with social media and things like that. And I'm happy doing just that, paying out just a little bit of money and having my budget and keeping it that way because I guess it makes me feel like my podcast has integrity that way.
Hmm,
I'm not taking a topic such as grief and trying to turn it into a paycheck.
I
It's
see.
more my legacy, my gift to everyone, because I know to grieve is really difficult. It's tougher than people think.
Sure. Now you've got a pretty heavy load, it sounds like, just with the number of interviews and everything else. So, I mean, this could almost be a full-time job for you.
Well, I am retired. I mean, I'm not 20 years old anymore. I am retired, although I still do some freelance work from home as well. Um, but I just kind of shifted and even though I have a number of podcasts this week, that's only because I'm trying to build up my queue. For example, podcasts I record today aren't going to launch until mid-March to the end of March.
Okay. Well, and
But
you can
I,
do that a little easier when you're weekly, of course, but
right,
right.
yeah, but I do that so that from time to time I can take a little break.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah,
A lot of people should listen to that right there.
yeah. Well,
What
I'm
you
going
just
on a
said.
cruise in a couple of weeks, so
All right. Well, so you're financially independent then to
I
where you
am.
don't need to worry about doing
I
making money off your
am, and
podcast
I
also.
thank my late husband for that. He took
Ah,
very good care of me.
I see. Okay. I mean, bless you. So I'm glad to hear that
Yeah,
for you. And it enables you to do this project, which is
absolutely.
great. Let me ask you this. You said that your daughter does your social media.
Uh-huh.
How is that how you've gotten the word out? Because I mean, in 4 years, 200 episodes, there's going to be some organic, people picking it up, so
Hmm.
on. I understand people who, I would guess that grief and grieving are probably things that are Googled and searched, often.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's going to help for sure. But then
Hmm.
but outside of those things, since you aren't running paid ads or anything like
Hmm.
that, how have you promoted it? How have you gotten the word
Oh,
out?
I can sum up that secret in just one word. And it's a word I think that every child in school needs to be taught. And the word is network.
Network. Oh,
Network.
okay.
Because for every guest I have, okay,
Hmm.
once the podcast is launched, they share that podcast with their network.
Right.
So all of a sudden, my personal network that I started out with, the 50 people or so that might have listened to my first episode, for every guest, that can add anywhere from another 50 to thousands of people that now have heard about the podcast As I Live and Grieve and maybe listened to it and maybe liked it and maybe keep listening to it. So that word is network. It didn't cost me anything. It doesn't cost me anything. And I know I could spend more money and do the SEO and hire all these people that contact me every day in my inbox
I'm
and
sure.
say, I noticed 15 errors on your website, but the networking has worked. And
Yep,
people are very happy to do that when they guest.
for sure.
And that's how we've grown.
Now, that's grassroots podcast networking 101, which is
Yep.
wonderful. But that takes a while,
Sure it does.
right?
Sure
So,
it
any
does.
idea how long it took you to like sort of build up traction on that? And it can be a feeling. You've been doing it for over 4 years.
Well, I'm going to say kind of my milestone was right about the 2 year mark. Right about the
Okay,
2 year mark.
yeah,
And I would watch the countries just because that was a fascination for me. But I think when I got to the 2 year mark, the number of country was up like maybe 60-ish. And I thought, whoa, and I just kind of stumbled across it one day and realized how much it had grown.
mhm,
And I kept thinking, how did it grow? I didn't really advertise. I'm not even one to go on a lot of podcasts to advertise or promote my own podcast. And so that's the only thing I could think of was networking. So I've really drilled that lesson into both my grandsons'
mhm.
heads, who are now college age. Network your brains out in college.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. 2 years seems to be, yeah,
I
the
think that's
mark.
about 2 years. Yeah.
That's great, and that's great for other people to hear.
Yeah.
I coach podcasting also, but I'm not one of those guys who's spamming inboxes. But I've been doing this a long time. So, but one of the things that I always talk to people about is how to grow your podcast without spending money. you know,
Yeah.
because I'm not an advocate
No.
of that, especially at the beginning. But this is one of the most basic, most surefire ways of doing it. But people don't want to put in the time. They don't want to
Yeah.
wait the 2 years. They're like, hey, I've done 5 episodes. How come I don't have money
Well, you know, I mean,
yet?
if
You
you
know?
think of everything in your life, I mean, even going to college, that's not a 6 month ordeal.
Right.
Most frequently it's at least 2 years.
Yeah.
So, you've got to do the time.
Very nice. Very nice. Um, okay. So, first of all, let me just thank you for everything you're sharing with us so
Oh,
far,
you're
because I,
welcome.
I really do appreciate it,
Sure.
and I love your honesty and your opinions. I think they're refreshing. So, thanks for all of that
Of
too.
course.
When you got started, and I know you kind of just said, you know what, podcast, I'm
Mhm.
going.
Yeah.
How did you get started? Did you invest a bunch of money in it? Did you just kind of grab your phone or something? How'd you go about getting started?
Oh, well, we did invest some money. I said to my daughter, I said, let's see if we can do this for $500 or less, which to me is kind of a shoestring budget to start anything, $500. And we used Buzzsprout.
Mhm.
That's where I went first. They had some great information on starting a podcast. We had our list of topics. I looked at some of the reviews in different trade magazines about different equipment. And really, I ran across somebody, and I don't even know who it was at this point, when I was asking a question about equipment, like how much money should I really invest in a microphone? How important is this? And he said to me, anything you have, even your smartphone, is good enough until it's not.
I
And
like the
I
way that's
thought
phrased.
that, and I thought that was the most sensible thing anybody said. He said, buy yourself a basic microphone and it will be good enough until you decide you need something better.
That's beautiful.
And that's what I did. I think I spent about $150 on a microphone. Maybe, oh, these are my original headphones, and I know they weren't very expensive. And I'm still using them.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Now, it's good enough until it's not good enough, so to speak.
Yeah.
About when was that, where you sort of were like, "Hey, I'm going to keep doing this. I've tried this. I like it. I'm going to buckle down. I am a podcaster now. Maybe I need to, upgrade." About when did
Well,
that happen?
I don't think I've ever upgraded. That's the issue. And it's because I wanted to keep so many of the things I've done in podcasting have been my own personal decisions. And I know people out there spend tons and tons of money. They get themselves a studio, they put all the soundproofing on the walls, and they, have the nice relaxing chairs and everything like that. This is my room. This is where I live. This is where I podcast. There's not soundproofing on the walls. And my podcast episodes probably are not sterling quality, but I wanted my listeners to feel like they were sitting down with me at a coffee shop, having a cup of coffee, and listening to my guest. That's what I wanted. I wanted that very organic conversation, that very organic environment, if you will. So I don't focus on that high level of quality for my podcast. Maybe it's a mistake, but again, since I seem to be achieving everything I want to achieve, I'm guessing for me, it works. So, in the same words, until it's not.
Well said. I
You know?
I like that. I mean, yeah, I like your that's a homemade backdrop behind you, I assume. I like that.
Those are my curtains over my windows that
Yeah.
show the snow outside in my yard.
Very,
Yeah.
very nice. Okay, good deal. I love that. Let me go back a step, because you said that your daughter's handling your social media, and
Yeah.
so everybody's always curious about what they have to do on social media. Now, even though she's handling it, do you know what she's doing with your social media, like in terms of posting or what she's
Oh, yeah.
sharing or anything like that?
Yeah, because I kind of have to remind her. Um, what we what we set up was that we would do we launch an episode every Tuesday. So every Friday, I want there to be a graphic, and we post on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, believe it or not, and LinkedIn, sometimes LinkedIn. We post an upcoming episode
Hmm.
to let people know this is what's going to launch next Tuesday. And it just has a picture of me. It has a picture of the guest and the guest's name and the title. And I try to keep my titles interesting. Many times it's the title of the book, if it's an author I'm going to interview. Like one coming up in a couple of weeks is about mental health, and it's called Has Medicine Lost Its Mind?
Oh, wow.
Yes, so I want it to be a title that might pique someone's curiosity. Um, and so that's every Friday, a graphic saying, here's the episode that's going to launch next Tuesday. On Tuesday, first thing in the morning, because I set my episodes to launch at 3 a.m., I'd like them to be ready for the morning commute. So I figure that allows enough time.
Yep.
So every Tuesday morning, I want a graphic to launch saying, here's the episode. And that usually has a little sound clip from the episode
Good deal.
that listeners can kind of take a listen and say, oh, that sounds curious. Let me take a listen. It does not link to the episode because it's kind of hard to link to a podcast app.
Right.
But I suppose that's something we could work on eventually. And then sometime during the week, usually maybe Wednesday or Thursday, I want just a graphic with maybe a quote about grief or about death or about loss. And I know one of my favorite ones is a very simplistic definition that grief is merely love with no place to go.
Oh,
So,
wow.
just a graphic and then just the name of the podcast down at the bottom. Those are the three social media events that I really like.
I got to write that down. Grief is just love
With no place to go. It's a quote by
with,
Jamie Anderson. It's actually a longer quote, but that's the last line of the quote, and that's what I love the most. And
boom.
that was, for me personally, that was my light bulb moment with grief. Why did it
Yeah.
hurt so much?
Yeah. Wow. I am sorry for your loss and,
Thank you.
for all of that. I hope that, it sounds like you're grieving in your own way, of course. But, the way you're helping folks with this is pretty amazing.
Hmm. Thank you.
Because this could easily be a depressing,
Hmm.
topic and something
Sure.
that people sort of like, oh, I don't want to hear about that. Right? It's kind of like when you're trying to
Exactly.
talk to your kids and
Well,
your grandkids about what happens when
that
I'm no
was
longer here,
me. I used to
right?
run. Yep.
Yeah. I don't say this is off topic and I didn't prepare you for this. So you can
That's
always
okay.
say, you know what, I don't want to talk about that. But I'm just curious, as a, father, my kids are all grown.
Hmm.
Do you have any advice for people to breaking that conversation and actually getting your kids or grandkids to sit down and listen when you're trying to talk about what you want to have happen when you're no longer here?
Oh, easy peasy. A good way to start is when your child is very, very young and introduce the word death. And that's, you might be walking in the park or down the sidewalk, and a guest told me this, perhaps after a rainstorm. And you know how the earthworms come out and then they
Hmm.
just kind of lay on the sidewalk and then just kind of shrivel up and die?
Yeah.
Or you might see a butterfly or a bird or something and introduce the word death to your child and talk about what happened and talk about that word death. And then throughout different conversations, it will be easier to discuss death when it happens, maybe a grandparent or something like that. The guest also said to be careful of what you tell them. Because, for example, if you go to church a lot and you tell them that so and so has gone to heaven, then when they hit their late teens, they might really be questioning what the heck is heaven? Because they're going to encounter different denominations, different questions, different spiritual issues. And that might really make them uncomfortable
Hmm.
with what they were told as a child.
Okay.
Um, so that type of conversations, but to broach it when the kids are pretty young. And the other thing is never lie to them. Just try to tell them at their level and don't talk too much about it. You know, the old joke about where did I come from? And the parent lapses into the story about sex and the birds and the bees, and all the child wanted to know, well, so and so came from Chicago. Where did I come from? Okay, so don't say too much. Just say
Sure.
enough, and chances are they'll scoot off and go play in the other room. They'll have heard what they need to hear until the next time.
Nice.
So and as far as talking about your own life, be real. If you've been to the doctor and you have gotten a terminal illness, talk about it.
Hmm.
And even talk about your own feelings, how it scares you, so they'll know it's okay to be scared or nervous or anxious, things like that. Um, Kids can absorb a lot. They're very resilient, more so than we adults are.
I'm sure that's true. Well, I
Yeah,
appreciate that. Thanks for fielding that
sure.
off the cuff, out of nowhere question. But
Yeah,
that's how these things go sometimes.
absolutely.
Um, okay. So when you first started podcasting,
Yeah.
did you just take to it naturally, or did you have some obstacles that you had to overcome, like I don't know, fear of talking into the mic, or didn't like sounding your own voice, or anything like that?
Well, the biggest obstacle I had was knowing what to say.
Oh,
So when I first started out, I would actually do a script of questions. I would look at the background or the bio or the book of my guest, and I would draft a number of questions. I would share that with Stephanie, who was partnered with me in this. She was my co-host initially, and she would pick a couple questions that she would ask, and we'd kind of divvy them up, and we would use that script. Then she reached a point where she had to go back to work full time. So she wasn't as accessible anymore. And she kind of stepped back from the podcast and it was just me. I reached a point where I didn't feel I needed a script any longer. It felt more natural to me.
hmm.
But initially, I was uncomfortable, I guess, being the host, being the one to direct the conversation, being the one to ask the questions. But then I got into it very quickly because it was so exciting to hear what the answers were. And I would
Right?
learn something with every guest. I would learn something or get a new perspective about something. So I overcame that obstacle very quickly. I think the probably the big one that I've still got is we still do just audio. I've not done audio video because I don't like having pictures of myself taken. That's part of it.
Wow. Okay.
I rationalize that by saying, in looking at my demographics, 92% of the people are listening on a mobile device. Therefore, they're probably in the car, walking the dog, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So why do video?
Okay.
Slick, huh?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a great way to rationalize it. I'm glad you admit that you're rationalizing it. So that's
I
good.
do. I admit that. Now we are, having said that, we are on YouTube.
Okay.
And YouTube's a very interesting platform for podcasts.
Hmm.
And YouTube actually will take your podcast and they will just put your background, your copy art or whatever, cover art, and just have that as the static background. But we still have listeners and followers on
Hmm.
YouTube.
Great. Awesome. All right. So once again, you're doing everything right.
I don't know
You're
about that.
checking all the boxes. It really does. It feels as though you really just were a natural going into this. Do you feel that way?
I've had people tell me that. I had one guest say, that interview was so much fun. It was like I was talking to Anderson Cooper. That's probably my favorite compliment ever.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not little.
No, it's not. That was huge for me. And I said, would you say that again, please?
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. We're kind of to the point in the show where I always ask this corny question,
Okay.
and I warned you about it ahead of time, but I didn't tell you
Yeah.
what it was,
No.
because I really like the answers that I get from this. So, and again, it's a little corny, but here we go.
Okay.
As you do your podcast and,
Mm.
and you're doing your thing, what is it about what you're doing that you love the most? What is it about what you're doing that you just absolutely hate the most?
As it relates to my podcast,
Hmm.
I love the most meeting new people and being able to engage in conversation with them, sometimes about provocative issues or perspectives, like in the topic of religion and grief, beliefs. What I hate about it, I hate the editing, and that's why I pay someone to do it.
I think editing and social media posting are like the top two,
Yeah, they would
answers
be
to
my
that.
top two.
And
Yeah.
you already had someone doing your social media posting,
Well,
so
and that's why somebody's doing my social media posting because I don't like doing that either.
I don't blame you. That's fantastic. Let me ask you this: you've got a kind of a crew with you, and that helps you out. I know that there was on the episode I listened to was there was a lady that was introduced. I don't know if she joined you for the whole conversation or not, but I think she was jumping in, right? That kind of does the
Probably
interview with you on your side.
Kelly, my younger daughter.
There you go. So you want to sort of give a shout out to your crew and let everybody know like who you have helping you and what they do?
Sure, sure. The primary person I want to kind of acknowledge is Stephanie, who helped me get started. And she was with me probably for about a year before she had to go back to work full time.
Okay.
And then podcasting just got to be a little too much for her. Then I was kind of solo for a while, maybe about 3 months. And I thought, I just cannot do this editing on my own because if I continue to do it, I'm going to quit. It was that much. I just hated the editing. So I started to look for a virtual assistant, not knowing how much it would cost me. And my paths crossed with a gentleman from Pakistan called Malik Farhan, who I'm just going to put it out there. He charges me less than $25 to edit a 30-minute episode.
Hmm.
Well, I can spend $20 at Starbucks. So let's face it, it was definitely worth it to me to give up a
Sure.
Starbucks coffee or two for the week
Mhm.
and have him edit my episodes. And he's been doing it for a while. He was very good. He's helped me different times with some special projects, maybe that I've
Great.
had as well. He's very good, and I love working with him. And we've been together for a while. And more recently, my younger daughter, Kelly, who I live in New York State, she lives in Texas, but she manages the social media. She hops on as a co host when she's able to, and she also keeps my website updated, which is number three on my list of things I don't really like to do. It's those routine tasks about running a podcast that I think really can wear you down and burn you out.
Nice.
So that's my staff, small
Nice.
staff, but we love it and it works.
Let's say it's got to be great though having all those people, that are all sort of aligned with your mission, working with
Oh
you.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, I do. And I know for Malik, especially with him living in Pakistan, I know he doesn't charge me much, but I know the money, I mean, he has a wife and a brand new little baby, and I know for him that money is vital.
Right.
So,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Especially a different country like that. I
Yep.
understand. That's neat. I think that's undervalued by a lot of
Hmm.
other podcasters.
Yeah.
Having a team, having people that can help you out.
Yeah.
We kind of get in this mindset of, well, if it costs money, I can't do it.
Yeah.
And you don't look at like what's your actual time money exchange, your stress and grief money exchange.
Oh, I do
You know?
put a value on my time.
Right.
I really do.
Yeah. And a
And
lot of
I
folks
think
don't.
everybody should. I think everybody should.
Yeah.
It's just like, and this is silly and way off topic, but during COVID, everybody balked at the prices, say for Instacart or something. But I put a value on my time, and it was well worth my time to not go into the store with a mask on and deal with all that.
Hmm.
To just be able to pull up to the curb, pick it up curbside, or have it delivered to my door
Right.
was well worth whatever it cost me because of the time it saved me.
Great example. Yeah. Great example.
Hmm.
Great example. Okay. Well, I appreciate all your time. I do have one more
Sure.
question if you're
Uh,
okay with that still.
of
All right.
course.
My last question for just about everybody, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say on this. You've given a
Uh-oh.
lot of great advice already.
Oh,
So let me narrow the topic down just a little bit so yeah, I'm gonna get some good advice out of you. Here we go. What is your best advice that you can come up with off the top of your head? No prep, okay, on this, off the top of your head for if a podcaster comes to you, say they've done 20 episodes, they've decided, yeah, I want to do this, I enjoy it, I'm in. What's your best piece of advice for that podcaster to become successful?
okay. I guess first it would be to consider your budget
Okay.
because you're not going to get rich. I mean, eventually you may be able to monetize here and there, but even if you run an ad, maybe you're only going to make 57 cents
Yeah.
because of the way they calculate it. So you're not going to get rich. So consider a budget. What are you willing to spend out of your own pocket in dollars? And also, how much time are you willing to devote? That would be the first thing. And once you make that commitment, make sure you're getting the most for your money. To try to allow yourself enough money so that you can have someone help you, so that you can have someone on your team. Even if you consider perhaps reaching out to a high school student, for example, that might have a knack with computers or be interested in podcasting, maybe that's somebody that you can kind of bring on board for either. nothing or very little money to help you with editing, for example. And heaven knows all of these kids know social media much better than I ever will. So, you might find somebody that can do that. And a lot of high school kids have trouble finding a job. So it might be a good way. Reach out to your friends in your own network. Maybe they have a child looking to make a few bucks here and there. So try to build that into your budget as well. So that would be my first thought. If you're just starting out your podcast, make sure it's sustainable. Make your list of topics. If you're going to be a solo podcaster, it's going to be harder for you to grow. So you might want to make sure in your budget you have some money for promotions or plan out how you're going to do that. Because having a guest every week, I have to tell you, that's the magic way to grow your podcast with little effort and little money. I guess
Love
those would
that.
be, and my favorite, everything is good enough until it's not.
There you go. Until it's not good enough.
Yeah.
That's those are great pieces of advice. I
Hmm.
mean, all the way down the list.
Yeah.
Excellent pieces of advice. I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that with
Oh,
everybody.
absolutely.
All right. Kathy, I appreciate your time. Thank you for being with
Oh,
us today. And, when this comes out, obviously, we're going to do everything we can to share it around, and we'll give you the links and the whole 9 yards.
perfect. Perfect.
Any parting thoughts for anybody?
No, except for podcasting can be as much for you as it is for everyone else. Everybody has their why that they want to start a podcast. And for a lot of people, it's because they have something they want to say and they want others to hear it. But just know that by doing that, many times you're also helping yourself. So just kind of keep that in mind. It might creep up on you. You might not realize it, but all of a sudden you might find yourself feeling better.
Wonderful. That's a great just mic drop right there. So,
Okay?
Kathy, it's been a pleasure. You're an absolute jewel. Thank you so
Oh,
much for coming on the show.
thank you. It's been my absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed the conversation. You're a
Here.
natural.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, as are you. So maybe
Oh, thanks.
that's why we're jiving so well.
Maybe why.
That could be it.
Maybe.
All right, folks, this has been another fantastic episode of the Podcaster Nation with another fantastic podcaster, Kathy Gleason, host of As I Live and Grieve podcast. Folks, like I said before, this is the podcast that is about podcasters. It's for podcasters and it's done by podcasters. This is the place. This is our community. This is where we raise each other up. This is the place where the rising tide raises all ships. So keep sailing.